on 5 Live.
A week's rest for the Formula One fraternity, and we're back in action for the beginning of a double header before the summer break ensues. It's round 13 of the 2024 season, and we're in Hungary at the Hungarian, about 12 miles northeast of a blisteringly hot Budapest, a track that has been on the calendar every year since 1986. It's a mainstay that can deliver a corker of a race every so often, and the way this season is shaping up, we're at a stage where we really can't predict too much. Leading through all the coverage this weekend is myself, Harry Benjamin, and alongside me today for both 3 practice sessions, I'm very pleased to say, it's Autosport's editor-in-chief Beck Clancy. Beck, 6 different race winners from the first 12 races so far this season. Driver market in overdrive. When I cast my mind back to Bahrain, if you'd have told me that, I would have bit your hand off. What is going on in Formula One right now?
It's brilliant, isn't it? What's going on is that nothing is going on. The regulations didn't change over the winter. The teams are finally understanding what to do with their cars. Everyone is closing the gap to Red Bull. There was a lot of scaremongering, from the media about how boring this season would be. Obviously, Red Bull dominated last year, and we thought that it might be a similar case this year, but we've had more race winners this year than 2022 and 2023 combined.
It really is a little bit unbelievable, but let's lap it up while we've got it. We are at the Hungarian, 4.381 kilometres, just over 2.7 miles, 14 turns, 6 to the left and 8 to the right. And there is a little bit of cloud cover coming in now over Budapest. They describe this place as Monaco without the walls. Does that mean we're going to get not great racing on Sunday? What's your views of Budapest and Hungary as a track on the calendar?
So I adore this weekend. Budapest is an amazing city. The track is just about a 30-minute drive outside of the city, so it's very easy to get to. Everyone stays within the city. It's a lot of fun. Traditionally, this has actually been the last race of the first half of the season, so there's a real end-of-term feel to it. We've obviously got this and Spa to go this time round. But this is a great track. No, it will not be as boring as Monaco. Although, let's remember, we still had it wasn't a Red Bull winner. We had a Charles Leclerc victory there, obviously. So not all was lost in Monaco. But no, it's a slightly unfair comparison, I would say. It's not quite Monaco without the walls. We do see some good racing. We do see some good battles. I remember, was it a couple of years ago, Lewis Hamilton chasing down for the year that Ocon won. And that battle that he had with Fernando Alonso. I'm here all the time for those two to be battling with each other. So no, we have seen some great races here, and given the current state of F1, as you mentioned earlier, Harry, I don't see why this weekend would be any different.
Absolutely, yeah. I actually rewatched as part of my prep for this week the 2014 Formula One race here with Ricciardo hunting down at the end, and it really does throw up some brilliant races. BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson is also with us. Andrew, it is incredibly hot, isn't it? Air temperature just over 30 degrees, track temperature just over 58 degrees. What are your thoughts, feelings, experiences ahead of FP1 this morning?
I'm hot, Harry. That's my main experience. It's really, really hot. Not as hot as it was on Wednesday when it was 38 degrees when I pulled up outside my hotel at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but still really, really toasty. The drivers are really going to be put through the mill. That Monaco without the houses comment, it's a bit anachronistic these days. It was made by Martin Brundle back in 1986, and now Hungary is more of a sort of medium speed circuit. The back section 2 is really quite quick. Lots of corners flowing one after the other, and all the drivers on Thursday were saying it's not really like Monaco at all, not in the current generation of cars with high levels of downforce. I agree with Beck. I think this is going to be a really interesting weekend ahead. Red Bull have got their biggest upgrade of the year on the car. Max Verstappen's basically saying yesterday it's quite critical to the rest of their season. I don't think he's in any danger of losing the Drivers' Championship, but the way McLaren are going, they are in danger of losing the Constructors' Championship, and who would have thought that 2 or 3 races ago? McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull, all in the mix. Ferrari have got a new floor as well, and they think that they can be take a step back towards their previous level of competitiveness after a slightly wobbly few races. So there's lots to look forward to.
There really is, isn't there? And you say, I mean, Red Bull have brought a lot of upgrades: engine cover, halo, rear corner, front wing, front corner, all bits to try and improve that car. And I found it interesting, Beck, what Max Verstappen said about it. If this is not giving us good lap time, I don't know how the rest of the season will evolve. Because, okay, Verstappen is still leading the championship. He's still banking points to extend that gap in the championship. I don't think anyone's in any fear that he's not going to sew this one up before the end of the season. But that Red Bull advantage that we obviously saw last year and we saw at the beginning of this season has come down. But what are the reasons for it?
You can look at it two ways. Red Bull perhaps haven't developed at the rate that their competitors are developing, but then we have the likes of Mercedes have finally, we think, understood their car. They have brought very good upgrades. They're arriving this weekend in Budapest off back-to-back wins. A position that, quite frankly, at the start of the year we never thought we'd be saying, and I think they were a bit surprised by it as well. And that Lewis Hamilton victory in Silverstone last time out was obviously very special for many reasons. So I think the gap is closing because the competitors are closing up. Red Bull are still a very good team. They're still obviously world champions. Well, you know, it's interesting what Benny's saying. I think we all agree Verstappen is going to wrap this one up. But that championship, the Constructors' Championship, I think there's only 71 points between Red Bull and Ferrari now. That's not a lot with 12 races still to go. You know, we're at the halfway point of this season. And Perez in that Red Bull, in that second seat, is not performing. And obviously lots of speculation about whether he'll still be there come the second half of the year. He is adamant that he will see out his contract, which runs through to next year. But Red Bull need to do something about this because, yes, Max Verstappen is extending. Even when he's not winning races, he still seems to be extending his lead in the championship, which is absolutely fine. Consistency is the key to winning championships. We know that. You know, we saw how happy he's been with second place because he knows that you can't win them all, quite literally. And he has to accept that second, you know, in Silverstone, for example, that was the best he could do. And he was delighted with it, a strange experience for him. But that second seat is, I don't know if Verstappen's as confident as the rest of us that he actually will win the Drivers' Championship because he's not getting any help from his teammate.
No, and when you look at Sergio Perez, and that's the sound you can hear, the Red Bull driver is out on the track, just making his way uphill towards the quick left-hander of Turn 4 with the aero rakes. Andrew, I mean, he's been eliminated from Q1 in 3 of the last 5 Grand Prix. He hasn't had top 6 finish in the last 7 races. He hasn't been on the podium since, well, I have to really cast your mind back to in a Grand Prix since China. I mean, he signed that new contract, but that hasn't eased the pressure on him, and he's still in this slump, which seems to be lasting longer than any of his previous slumps have.
That's right, Harry. I think a lot of people in Formula One are pretty mystified as to why Red Bull signed Perez on that new 2-year contract around Monaco time, given that he was already starting his sort of slump in form, and it's not like it's the first one that he's had at Red Bull. They're in a slightly difficult position, though, aren't they, in terms of how to replace him, because there's not really an obvious candidate within the Red Bull fold and no one else available. You know, they don't really rate Tsunoda. Ricciardo's not beating Tsunoda, and Lawson's only done 5 Grand Prix and didn't consistently beat Tsunoda either. So, and would you put a 5 Grand Prix rookie in alongside Max Verstappen? On the championship, I think Verstappen's in the clear because his advantage is so big, unless Mercedes and McLaren start getting both cars ahead of him consistently, race after race after race. They're looking like they're building a sort of performance potential where they could do that, but so far, whether it be driver errors or team unoptimization, if you like, that hasn't happened. If that starts to happen, and he's starting to finish 5th quite often, and particularly Lando Norris is winning consistently, then Verstappen's got a problem, but so far that hasn't happened.
No, well, we're talking about all these points. Let's just bring you up to speed. Max Verstappen does lead the Drivers' Championship, 255 points to his name. He's 84 clear of Lando Norris. Then it's Leclerc, Sainz and Piastri, the top five. And then over in the Constructors, Red Bull lead the way, 373 points to their name. They are 71 clear of Ferrari. Then it's McLaren, who are only 7 points behind Ferrari. Mercedes, Aston Martin, the top five. RB head up that second half of the Constructors' Championship, with Haas chasing now because they have had back-to-back sixth-place finishes, courtesy of Nico Hülkenberg. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. Alpine, Williams and Sauber 10th and last, the only team yet to get off the marks. For those who wish to do a sync-up, it's 55 minutes and 1-0 remaining of this first free practice session. Max Verstappen is currently fastest with a 1:27.15. Then it's Lando Norris, Russell, Ricciardo, Hamilton, the top five, Bottas, Tsunoda, Joe, Magnussen, Ocon, the top 10, Gasly. Behrman is out there. Oliver Behrman, the young British racer, currently racing in Formula 2 and now confirmed to be joining as a official race driver for the Haas F1 team next season. Just ahead of Stroll, and then some Sainz and Leclerc, Alonso and Perez have all been out there but haven't done competitive lap times as of yet. So then Red Bull seem to be still pushing hard, and in a place where you're at the very top, Beck, and you start to see, or do you start to see, the sort of diminishing gains after a while. And I also wonder, and I've listened to a lot of people bring this subject up, the wind tunnel allocation and the CFD timing, not to mention, of course, the penalty for exceeding the cost cap carrying over. Do you think that is having a weight on their performance advantage at the moment?
Yeah, well, they certainly think it's having an impact. So your wind tunnel time is dictated where you finish in the championship. So obviously they are the champions, so they get the least amount of time. Verstappen's actually said this week in Budapest that he thinks that it's having an impact. I mean, you can kind of understand why it would. You get less testing time. But as I said, these cars are pretty much what we saw last year. So there's an evolution from that. As you mentioned, they breached the cost cap. They had that took a hit to their wind tunnel testing time as well. So yes, it will eventually have an impact. But we saw it. We have these eras of dominance. We saw it with Mercedes. When the regulations stay the same, the gap does naturally close, and our next big regulation change is 2026. Lots of people calling for that to be pushed back. That's definitely not going to happen because there is far too much money already invested in that, and all the obviously new manufacturers that are coming in, Audi, for example, Ford with Red Bull. So yes, you do naturally get the diminishing returns. That does happen. Red Bull are being impacted by the reduction in the wind tunnel time. But I keep going back. I think it's just McLaren and Mercedes and, well, perhaps this weekend Ferrari, if they've finally understood this downgrade that they brought to the car in Spain, which has been causing them issues the last month or so. They are closing the gap to Red Bull. And I think that's more what we're seeing rather than Red Bull starting to struggle somewhat.
Yeah, it will be really interesting to see how they fare, isn't it? Of course, Hamilton and Mercedes riding high after that astonishing race, that astonishing win 2 weeks ago at the British Grand Prix. A fantastic race just to be able to sit and watch it. And, of course, back-to-back wins for Mercedes, showing their upward trajectory. Here's Magnussen on the radio.
How are the brakes still, Kev? Are they still poor?
Terrible, yeah, really bad.
Copy that.
The seat's nice, though.
Okay, that's good.
So the seat's nice, though. That's Kevin Magnussen reporting back about the brakes. A lap ago, he actually just had a bit of a lock-up coming through the left-hander coming through turn 8 into turn 9, and actually just got caught up behind his teammate for this session. Oliver Behrman had to slam on the brakes in the front left with a bit of smoke coming off it for Kevin Magnussen. And of course, well, we're on the Dane, so we may as well see that subject off. Kevin Magnussen will not be a Haas Formula 1 driver at the end of this season. That news breaking yesterday, and I think, Beck, we all kind of saw that one coming. He has been outclassed by Nico Hülkenberg this year, who's having a sensational season. But I'm a bit sad to see K-Mag go, if I'm honest. He's kind of a mainstay of Haas. He's a cat almost with 9 lives in his Formula 1 career. He's had so many times where he's been dropped and come back again with different teams. Do you think this is the end of the road for K-Mag? And do you think it is the logical decision from Haas?
Yeah, sadly, I do think it is the end of the road for him. And I do agree that it is the logical decision for Haas to part ways with him. He is an extremely popular figure within the paddock. he is exactly what you see on TV. He's fun, he's relaxed, he stops and happily talks to whoever, takes pictures, he does all of that. I mean, he's only 31, so you could say he's got some years left in him, but I think, you're right, Harry. I think he's only scored points in 2 races so far this year, and for a team like Haas, when you look at what Hülkenberg's doing, 2 6th-place finishes, it's difficult to argue to keep him, and the driver merry-go-round continues at full steam, as you mentioned at the start. It looks like Ocon, who is leaving Alpine, that was confirmed obviously after, not because of Monaco, so we're told, but absolutely because of Monaco, and crashing into his own teammate Gasly. So we believe Ocon is now going to be joining Ollie Behrman at Haas next year, but I just don't see where Magnussen would go, sadly.
Yeah, Andrew, what do you make of it? We all saw it coming for Kevin Magnussen, but is it, to your understanding as well, that Esteban Ocon is kind of a done deal? Because I also heard rumours that Esteban Ocon was almost at Williams doing a seat fit for maybe a mid-season replacement for Logan Sargent.
So I was told that Ocon has already signed his Haas deal. I can't confirm that, but that's what I was told at Silverstone by a couple of sources who definitely should know. One source was close to Mercedes, who manage Ocon, so I'm pretty confident it's probably true. But as I say, here's Joe's radio.
I've got those things coming off on my sideboard. Something else just came off on the left.
That's Joe just saying something came off of his side pod. The Saubers are running a few upgrades to that side pod. He's now back in the garage. Carry on, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, what I don't know is why it hasn't been announced yet, if that is the case. I think Magnussen's future's looking a bit shaky as far as Formula One's concerned. There aren't that many seats left. He's not in the Red Bull frame, which basically means there's only Alpine and Williams and Sauber. I'm told that Nico Hülkenberg, who has already signed for Sauber Audi, is quite keen to have Magnussen there, but I'm not sure the team share that impression. So I
really?
think
why?
He's probably going to end up. Maybe because he thinks he can beat him. I was cynical about it.
Not because K-Mag's a great team player.
I think they do get on, actually, despite the rather lewd comments that were exchanged between them a few years ago at this race. But in fact, Hülkenberg was saying yesterday that they've become friends, and maybe that's related to it as well. Anyway, I think he's going to end up back in endurance racing, Magnussen probably, and Ocon at Haas, yes, which only leaves Alpine, Williams really with seats open. And of course, we've got the question of the big question mark in the driver market, which is Carlos Sainz, who's lost his Ferrari drive to Lewis Hamilton. We still don't know what he's doing. It looks rather like he's waiting to see what kind of fallout there may be at Mercedes and Red Bull, with Verstappen, whose future is still a question mark, Perez, and of course the vacant seat that Hamilton has left behind. Sainz was saying yesterday he doesn't really understand why the driver market is happening so quickly this year, which is, I guess, I took that as a coded message saying I'm going to wait, and so everyone else is going to have to wait for me too.
Yeah, it is. The driver market feels like it exploded before we even started the season, and now we're into that moment where it normally is silly season time, and we're still talking about it. There are still pieces of the puzzle to be solved, but that one piece of the puzzle down at Haas, at least for Kevin Magnussen, has been solved. He knows his future will not be with the American outfit. He spoke to Lawrence Barretto about it.
Hey Kevin, well obviously Haas has always felt like family to you. You can see how happy you are. So how did it all go down when it was clear that you wouldn't be in a race seat next year?
Yeah, well, I think it's been a very open conversation, very transparent. It's not, Ayao is a very honest guy, and I think that's kind of been the case with this team from the very beginning. So I think the process has been very, very good and very, very healthy, if you want, and honest at least. And I think right now still many seats available in Formula One for next year. It's all quite open, so I think the best thing to do is just to do good races, and that means you're staying in the hunt for those available seats.
Saw in the announcement that Ayo was talking about there'd be a way maybe you could continue to work together, but just listening to you today, it seems like you want to keep racing. Like, how do those two things kind of dovetail together?
Well, of course I can't be working with Haas if I'm racing in another Formula One team, but I think it's nice to hear Ayao say that shows his he's grateful for my contribution to the team and wants to kind of hang on to it, which I'm of course open to if my situation allows it, and we'll see. I think that would be a really a positive and very natural kind of role to take, and of course it can only happen if I'm not racing in Formula One.
But if you manage to get one of those seats, what are you kind of saying to the teams at the minute about why they should hire you? Because clearly you're still loving racing. I can see how hungry you are for it.
Yeah, I think there's only a couple of very experienced drivers left on the grid, and I think it's all very open. I think they can of course take rookies, but if they want experienced drivers, proven drivers, I think it's then there's only a couple available. So let's see how it pans out. I'm gonna focus on the season and just have a little bit of patience, because I think Carlos needs to make his mind up, and then it seems like. But who knows? Maybe some of the teams will get impatient and make a move anyway. But best thing to do is just do good races.
It certainly is. Kevin Magnussen there speaking to Lawrence Barretto. 44 minutes and 29 seconds remain of free practice one. Max Verstappen is fastest out on track. He's on the soft compound tyre. Then it's Russell, Norris, Bottas, Hamilton, the top five. Albon has just slotted into sixth ahead of Leclerc, who is on a decent lap at the moment. He's on a hard tyre, just making his way through the right-hander of turn 5 before he breaks for the chicane of 6 and 7. Gasly is 8th, Ricciardo, Piastri is the top 10, Tsunoda, Ocon, Alonso, Joe, Behrman is 15th ahead of Magnussen, Stroll, Sainz, Perez still with no time on the board. He has been out on track though, and Sargent 20th and last. He is on an out lap now, hasn't actually done a competitive lap time yet. Hear me out, Bex. Kevin Magnussen brings experience. He hasn't got much to play for really anymore. He's a team player. I think he's shown that this weekend. He's not out and out fastest over one lap, but he's not far away usually from his teammates. If we're looking at replacements for a number 2 driver in a top team, a la Sergio Perez, is it completely ridiculous to not have a little consideration for somebody like Kevin Magnussen?
I completely agree with you. I think teams should be considering him, but so apparently with K-Mag, he's very good at giving feedback to the teams and debriefs. He gets on very well with the engineers, with the mechanics. Clearly he gets on very well with the other side of the garage as well. So he is a good team player. We've seen him during this season, the races. He works, he does what he's told. He definitely takes a few for the team, to use the football analogy. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that teams are looking at him. I just don't know where he would go. He's definitely not going to go to Mercedes. Alpine, maybe, but I think they've got other options. Williams, it could be an option, but then they've got Albon now, who's very experienced. I mean, to talk about Williams very quickly, Logan Sargent, he looked like a broken man yesterday. My goodness, that his media session was actually very painful. You really felt for him. Obviously, the rumours have surfaced that he could be out at the summer break, so potentially only 2 more races to go. The Ocon was in the Williams factory. He did a seat fit. They couldn't make it work for this year, definitely, and maybe even next year. James Vowell, talking to my Autosport colleague Ben Hunt, saying that actually, they had crossed paths before at Mercedes, Ocon being a Mercedes young driver, and James Vowell obviously came from Mercedes. So they couldn't quite make that Williams mash-up work between the two. But it does look like Williams are investigating options to replace Logan Sargent at the summer break. Who they get in, I don't really know. I don't know if Benson's got an idea on this. But it's a really difficult one, because we were all saying at the end of last year, surely they can't keep him. He's clearly not good enough. We know he's not good enough. He's constantly outperformed by his teammate Alex Albon, who is able to do things with that car that very few probably could. Alex Albon's a very, very good driver, but Williams have got themselves into a bit of a pickle with this one, I think.
They have, haven't they, Andrew? And just to reiterate what Beck said about Logan Sargent, I was at the Goodwood Festival of Speed last weekend, and Sargent was driving one of the old Williams up the hill, talking to him, interviewing him. it just felt like a man who knows that he is on borrowed time already and unlikely to see out the season. But to the point that Beck made, Williams have got themselves into a bit of a pickle, RE driver lineups now, haven't they?
So you were asking about potential replacements, Harry. The obvious one is Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who's the Mercedes protege, who's in Formula 2 at the moment, and who for a long time Toto Wolff was basically his plan A was to replace Lewis Hamilton with Antonelli next season. Wolff's gone a bit colder on that recently. He's sort of talked about Sainz still being an option. So I don't know that Sargent's going to be replaced mid-season, but I think if he's going to be, that would be the obvious one. Vowles and Wolff know each other, and from Mercedes' point of view, if they do want to put him in their car, it'd be great for him to get some races this year of F1 experience. On the other hand, Antonelli might be an option for Mercedes and Antonelli in Williams for the entirety of next season if Wolff doesn't think that he's quite ready for Formula One. And actually, I'm getting the sense that Wolff's thinking that there's a big risk of burning Antonelli out already. If they put him in next year, George Russell, let's not forget, is beating Lewis Hamilton. Here's Russell's radio, in fact.
Yuki wasn't looking at his mirrors.
Yeah, that was George Russell on the exit of turn 1, and Tsunoda just coming across the line, and Russell having to take to the grass to avoid contact there. So Tsunoda getting a bit of a wake-up call to look into his mirrors there. Andrew,
so
carry on.
Just finish that point. Russell is beating Lewis Hamilton in qualifying pretty convincingly this year. Hamilton's barely out-qualified him at all. I think it's 2 or 3 times. I can't remember.
10-2 in Russell's favour.
There you go, thank you. The actual average time gap's not that big, but it's bigger than it's been before. So Russell is super fast, and I think sometimes Russell is perhaps even a little bit underrated. He's an exceptional Formula 1 driver, and to put a 17-18-year-old as Antonelli will be next year with so little racing experience in alongside Russell, I think is a massive risk for Antonelli's career. He might be fine, of course, but it's a big risk. You take it if you think he's going to be that good. You've got him under contract. You don't need to rush him, and I think that's where Wolff's head is beginning to be at the moment. So I've wandered off, haven't I, on a tangent from your Logan Sargent question.
That's practice for you.
But yeah, I mean, look, Williams, they're suffering from their competitive reality. They had a pretty good season last year, and they're having a less good season this year. James Vowles is, he talks good game. He's trying to turn that team into a competitive proposition over a period of time. But at the moment, they've hit a load of roadblocks, and some of those roadblocks are to do with how outdated the Williams facilities are, and they've got to upgrade them. But their attempts to do so led them into all sorts of difficulties at the start of this year, and they're 9th in the Constructors' Championship at the moment. So it's no wonder that the likes of Sainz are not that keen to commit to a team like that in that situation. Sainz doesn't have a lot of good options, really, which is why he's kind of waiting around for Red Bull and Mercedes. But when you're in that sort of position as a team, you kind of have to wait your turn almost in the driver market, because the best drivers are not going to commit to you, and that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and that second spot alongside Nico Hülkenberg in what will be the Works Audi team, still, we're told, they're not going to wait around forever for Carlos Sainz, but at the moment they are waiting, and they have no announcements on that yet. Still so many seats to be filled up and down the grid. It's going to be a fascinating few weeks, and I'm sure a lot of discussions happening in the summer break. Of course, we're here this weekend for the Hungarian Grand Prix, and then we go to Belgium in Spa next week before we get the August summer shutdown. Here's Stroll on the radio.
The car is quite shocking to drive right now.
Lance Stroll saying the car is quite shocking to drive right now. They've got quite a lot of upgrades on that Aston Martin. Front wing, halo, floor, diffuser, beam wing, all being added in their efforts to try and re-find their way. Of course, double points for them last time out at the British Grand Prix. Alonso finishing 8th, Stroll finishing in 7th. And Andrew, that was a much needed result for the Aston Martin team, who had not scored any points since Canada.
It was, but I think that comment from Lance Stroll is a bit of a concern for them. They've been battling with inconsistent handling of that car. The driver's basically saying it's unpredictable. And this upgrade that's on it today, a new floor fundamentally, is the major part of it. It's a very significant upgrade, and that's aimed at addressing that problem. So the drivers can have a bit more confidence in attacking the corners, which is the issue that Mercedes were having earlier in the year and have now fixed. So to hear Stroll on after his first run with the upgrade, assuming that he's got the upgrade, by the way, I will check that now I've said this, but that's a slightly worrying sign, I would say.
Yeah, we'll keep a track of that. Thanks, Andrew. Alonso is currently 13th out there on the hard tyre, and Stroll currently down 18th on the hard tyre. Verstappen still fastest. He's in the pits at the moment, and he did set his quick lap on the soft tyre, 1:19.8, 2/10 clear of Russell. Piastri third, then it's Norris. Bottas with a decent time up into sixth as Carlos Sainz rounds the final corner on the hard tyre. The Spaniard crosses the line, DRS rear wing flap open, and puts that Ferrari up into third spot. Now, just to let you know, there is a new way you can listen to our coverage. Now, we're not allowed to actually say specific brand names, but say you've got a smart speaker, say it's called Beck. All you have to do is go, "Hi Beck, can you ask BBC Sounds to play Hungarian Grand Prix Practice 1? And jobs are good, and suddenly you're listening to us on your smart speaker. Isn't that great, Beck?
This is what my husband says to me all the time.
So make sure, if you are desperate to, if you get off your phone or you need to hook up your smart speaker in your kitchen, or wherever you're listening to us, that is how you can do it. Just ask Beck to ask BBC Sounds to play Hungarian Grand Prix Practice 1. And now we also want to ask a question, hashtag BBC F1, for those of you listening around the world on Twitter or X or whatever you call it these days. Obviously a global IT outage affecting millions of people, big organisations. We're fine, by the way. But it got us thinking, and it got me and producer Paddy definitely thinking, what thing in Formula One could fail and you wouldn't mind? Could it actually make Formula One better? Hashtag BBC F1. We'd love to get your thoughts on this. So you brought up a good point, Beck. Radio comms. If it failed, suddenly no driver-to-team communication.
Yeah.
Carnage.
It would be carnage. I quite like the fact that when I walked into the comms box, you and producer Paddy had come up with the question, but neither of you had come up with an answer. So it was obviously playing on your mind. But yes, I thought radio comms. I quite like the idea of radio comms going down. Yes, okay, we get to hear a lot more about what the drivers and their engineers say to each other, and sometimes it's very fun, and sometimes, probably 99% of the time, it's actually really boring and for the benefit of the FIA because they're trying to stitch up other teams or other drivers. I quite like the old school racing, let's just go, get on with it, use your mirrors, and don't tell them that, you know, Lance Stroll is 3.2 seconds behind Max Verstappen. Okay, that was never going to happen. But, you know, don't say who's closing the gap. Don't tell them that they've got traffic coming up. Just let them go and figure it out for themselves. Let's go racing.
It could be spicy. So hashtag BBC F1. What thing in Formula One could fail and you wouldn't mind? Could it actually make F1 better? Let us know. That's what Beck has gone for in terms of radio comms, but something like DRS maybe as well. Let us know, and we'll try and get through them in the next half an hour. Just an update on the Aston Martin upgrades. We're hearing Lance Stroll has not got the upgrade for this session, but we'll have it this afternoon. So just fine-tuning the balance of his Aston Martin this morning. Now, Oliver Behrman is the sound you're listening to at the moment in the Haas, making his way through the chicane. Quick right, left of 6 and 7 as Alex Albon goes to the top of the times on the soft tyre, a 1:19.7 with 31 minutes, 30, 29, 28 seconds remaining. Now, we've spoken a lot about Red Bull, and Beck, you brought up how part of the reason that perhaps their advantage is fading. We'll see how the upgrades perform this weekend, of course. We'll all be backtracking on that massively. But Mercedes, we've already said it, back-to-back wins. OK, George Russell lucked into his win, but he was there, in it to the end, to scoop up that win. Lewis Hamilton, hard-earned win. They locked out the front row of the grid in qualifying as well, in what was a spectacular race for Lewis Hamilton. 9 wins around Silverstone. In fact, he could do 9 around the Hungarian come the end of Sunday. And the fact that I'm even saying he could do that, are Mercedes back? Is this, have they rediscovered their form finally?
Yeah, it does feel like that. I mean, you're right. Russell lucked into his win in Austria when Verstappen and Norris had that clash. But you have to be in the right place to pick up these wins. You know, this is a kind of a complaint thrown at Perez, let's say. He's never in the right position to be picking up points, whereas Mercedes, we've heard it, haven't we, for the last 2.5 years. Every weekend it was the same thing. Oh, we don't understand the car. And it wasn't even just from circuit to circuit. It was almost throughout the evolution of the weekend. On a Friday the car could work, on a Saturday it wouldn't, and on Sunday they'd suddenly be on the podium and have absolutely no idea why. And Hamilton was very critical. You know, he came out with the strong comments saying, you know, particularly at the start of last year, no one listened to me. I was telling them what was wrong with the car. They chose to stick with the no side pod design last year, as they had the previous year in 2022. And he was very unhappy. You know, there was very much a sense when he announced at the start of the season that he was leaving for Ferrari, that part of that was that he just didn't feel like anyone was listening to him anymore at Mercedes. Obviously, Ferrari, an amazing opportunity too. So every weekend would finish with Toto Wolff saying, we just don't understand. I was about to do an impression then, and then I realised I was on radio and I probably shouldn't do that. You have to catch me in the pub to get my impression of Toto Wolff. You know, every weekend would finish with him saying, we don't understand the car. And it got a bit tiresome to listen to be honest. And it feels like they've brought upgrades now, that they finally do actually understand the car, and we have seen the results of that. And you know, you said about in Silverstone, George Russell on pole, and I mean, he is still Mr. Saturday as he was back in his Williams days. He is a superb qualifier, and I agree with Benny that he is probably underrated. He is absolutely fantastic. F3 and F2 champion in consecutive years, only the second ever driver to do that, the first being Charles Leclerc, of course. So brilliant for Mercedes that they locked out that front row on merit. And that Lewis Hamilton victory in Silverstone was again on merit. There wasn't, you know, perhaps maybe a bit of luck in the sense of McLaren got their strategy a bit wrong and they made some mistakes. But it does appear, and I say it tentatively, it does appear like they're back in the mix. And I wouldn't be surprised if for the rest of the season, if they carry on at this trajectory, that we'll see them on the podium pretty regularly.
Yeah, and actually just hearing from the high-ups at the BBC, they've said it is all good for you to do your Toto Wolff impression. Floor is yours.
That's Paddy stitching me up, isn't it? No, producer Paddy.
Virtual safety car out on the circuit at the moment, so everybody slows down to a delta, and that is because there is some debris on track which is instantly cleared up by a marshal, and that is on the short run down between turn 11 and 12, the little straight that takes you to the right-hander of turn 12. So that has seemingly flung off the right-hand side of the Williams of Alex Albon, because we are seeing images of, if in doubt, gaffer tape it up, and that is what they're doing on the lower part of the side pod, and just putting a bit of gaffer tape. So we haven't actually seen how it's flown off, but clearly there is a bit of a gap there where one of the fins that seems to, the aero fins that seems to be lined up there with 3 others, is missing. So they're just making sure that all tidies itself up, and we are just about to hear what happened. And he did go over the red and white curbs, and I think that's just unsettled it, and then it's flung off the racing line on the right hand side, but the marshal has very quickly cleared that up. So VSC back in, and we are back to a green flag running here for free practice 1 at the Hungaroring, the 13th round of the Formula 1 season. 26 minutes and 43 seconds remain. Talk of Mercedes, they're currently 1 and 2, 10th and a half between them. Russell heads Hamilton, Russell with a 1:19.1. They stuck this soft tyre on. Albon 3rd, Verstappen 4th, Piastri on an outlap at the moment in 5th. Norris is on a decent lap too, just making his way through turns 9 and 10. Bottas, that lap time has stuck well for Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber, up in 6th ahead of Perez. Then it's Sainz, Norris currently 9th, making his way towards turn 12 now. Then it's Magnussen who rounds out the top 10 just ahead of his teammate Oliver Behrman. For this session, he'll hand that car back over to Nico Hülkenberg for free practice 2. Now, we were asking on hashtag BBC F1 what thing in F1 could fail and you wouldn't mind. Could it actually make F1 better? Kaylee said track limits detectors could fail, and it would make the weekend much better. Beck?
No, I cannot stand the conversation around track limits, but I think they should race within the limits. So I'm going to disagree with that one. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, Kaylee. Dwyer has said losing weather forecasts could be chaotic, but obviously only for mixed races where the weather is in the air. Wouldn't make any difference on a beautiful sunny day. But can you imagine if, like Silverstone 2 weeks ago, if they said sorry, no weather radar available?
But you know what? They obviously spend millions on their weather radars, and they actually have people dotted around the bits of the track to see where the rain is. And then you saw the images in Silverstone. They just stick their hand out for all the money that they spend. And I really like the good old-fashioned way of doing it. Going back to, the old school, I'm going to sound really old now and I'm showing my age, the really old school way of racing, that you just kind of stick your head out the window and see if it's raining.
I mean, if in doubt, that's the best way to do it, right? You see it all the time with the engineers sticking their hand out from the underside of the pit wall gantry. We're just getting a look at the McLaren pit wall. Andrea Stella, the team principal, just putting his headphones on. And McLaren. Now, the British Grand Prix, I hate saying this because Formula One is a woulda, coulda, shoulda business, right? But Lando Norris, that was another race. He had a very good chance of winning, and ultimately it didn't happen. There are a multitude of reasons, but particularly in the final stint and the tyre choice from the team, highlighting an error in strategy. And it's not the first time that's happened this year. And obviously these guys have got to make split decisions in an instant. But it's happened a few times on the trots. How are you seeing this play out for McLaren? Do you think there's needs to be some fundamental changes made in how they utilise their strategy? Is it an issue on the pit wall? Does Lando Norris need to be firmer in his decision making from within the cockpit? What's going on with these McLaren strategy calls?
It feels quite reminiscent, doesn't it, of Ferrari a couple of years ago, where they were making pit stop errors, they were making strategy errors, the drivers were making mistakes, and they did have a fundamental change within. Obviously, Fred Vasseur then came in as team principal, changed everything up, and they are making progress. Well, they were making progress up until Spain, which we'll obviously come to talk about. McLaren definitely needs to change something. One of the things that I think needs to change almost immediately is how hard Norris is on himself. Because I can't help but think, and the team insists this doesn't happen, but it's hard to believe that doesn't feed back into the team, and that negativity. And I've said it to Norris himself a million times, please stop being so hard on yourself. I feel like it's his mum. I've known him for a long time, and I don't like to see it, but he says it inspires him, and that's what motivates him, and that's fine. Everybody needs their own, however they're motivated, but they're definitely getting strategy wrong. I think most of the teams actually were probably a lap too late changing onto the slick tyres in Silverstone, and McLaren went a lap later than even that. And they actually, I think Red Bull went pretty early with Verstappen, which is how he ended up having a great finish to that race, and I think he was so surprised to finish second. McLaren just got it wrong again, and actually Norris was probably the most harsh on himself in Silverstone, because obviously it's his home race, he wanted to win it, he had the opportunity to win it, but after that race he was saying to us in the media, it can't keep happening, we keep saying my time will come, but I'm ready for the wins, and he's obviously got one win under his belt now in Miami. We all thought that would drive him forward, but actually it hasn't happened, and it feels a bit like they're stalling, and they can't keep making these mistakes. They are a race team which, it's quite, actually, for all its history, the people currently within that team don't really know race wins. They definitely don't know championship wins. It's been such a long time. And so they're all having to get to grips with this new situation, environment that they're finding themselves in. They are now race winners. They can call themselves that in this year, this season. But it's just getting your head around that. Obviously, Red Bull, every time they have a bad weekend, you have every faith that they'll bounce back because they're a team of champions. They quite literally are a team of champions. And so they're very used to the pressure, the situation, how you win a race, how, they probably have the best strategist up and down the paddock, Hannah Schmitz. She's absolutely superb. I don't know if I can recall a time that she's got a call wrong. And there's another guy, his name has now left me, from Red Bull as well, but they have a very strong strategy team, and it's such an important part of Formula One. One of the main things I like about Formula One actually is the strategy side of it, and it is an absolutely crucial part of winning a race. You have to get it right, and the drivers can only do so much, but if your team is pulling you in a lap too late and the track's drying out, and there's only, you can't really do a lot. So it was understandable that Norris was disappointed after Silverstone. But he's right. They can't keep saying our time will come, because this is their time.
I mean, Andrew, it's so easy to be a critic, isn't it? But if you look back at Monaco, Canada, Spain, Austria and Silverstone, let's just hear from Alonso.
Fernando, what would you say on car balance for that lap to help the other car?
Good luck.
That was Alonso being asked to give some balance help for Stroll. He replies with, yeah, good luck. So I think Aston Martin clearly not too happy with how things are going at the moment. Alonso currently 10th. Stroll is down in 19th. Stroll does not have the upgrade on his car yet. He'll get that for this afternoon. But back to our McLaren chat, just to see that off, Andrew. So yeah, I mean, big and small mistakes have played a crucial part in McLaren's failure to get a win. And if things had worked out quite in their favour, Andrew, they'd be a handful of points behind Red Bull. They'd be second in the constructors.
So I would be very careful saying that if I were you, Harry, because Andrea Stella, the team principal, will be coming after you, because the article that you're referring to has made McLaren very angry.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I actually think that this has been slightly overstated. There's no question McLaren have made a couple of mistakes, but to just go through the races since Miami, just briefly. Imola, they qualified behind Verstappen. They were behind him in the race as a result of that. They did the only thing they could, which was a slightly offset strategy. They caught him at the end. They were never going to overtake. That is not a lost win. Monaco, I think it's ridiculous to look at Piastri's sector times and say they were the best three if you add them up in qualifying, and therefore he should have been on pole, and therefore he should have won the race, and use that as a justifiable argument that they lost that race. Leclerc was outstanding in Monaco, and it's just not the way Formula 1 works. You hardly ever put your three best sector times together to make your qualifying lap, because the tyres don't really last that long. Canada, yes, they made a mistake. They should have called Norris in, but they had 200 metres at 200 miles an hour to make that decision. You can argue that they could have preempted it by saying if there's a safety car pit. They didn't make that decision. They didn't have that conversation. Okay, in hindsight, that's an error, but I think 200 metres, that's a bit harsh. Spain, Norris made a good start, just not quite as good a start as Verstappen. And then from there, they had to try and come back at him again on an offset strategy. It didn't work out, but again, like a slightly less good start. Pretty harsh to criticise too badly on that, especially when it's the sort of thing that happens in Formula 1. Austria, yes, maybe he should have overtaken Verstappen, but then you can argue that Verstappen's defence was way over the limit. Some people would, and he got penalised for it in the end. So was that Norris's fault, really? And then Silverstone, yeah, they dropped the ball in two ways. Norris stopped too long at his stop, and then they didn't put on the new medium tyres that they had chose, which they planned to do, and they chose to use softs. So I think from when that's the evidence, it's hard to build a narrative that they've lost so many wins. One, sure, at Silverstone, maybe one in Canada. After that, I think it's just racing. It's definitely true to say that they're not as battle hardened as Red Bull and Mercedes in terms of battling at the front. But the Canada and Silverstone mistakes were in very specific circumstances of wet, dry races. And so I just think we should be... I think for me, it's only my opinion, but I think we should cut them a little bit more slack than some people are doing at the moment.
I agree. It's so easy, isn't it, to go from lauding an underdog to then suddenly when they're performing at that level, and then the scrutiny intensifies, and the small mistakes, or are they even mistakes, get amplified massively. When you speak to people in that team, I mean, Beck, when you talk to Andrea Stella, the team principal, I think he's one of the best team principals in the paddock. His wealth of experience, every time you talk to him, he's obviously got this engineering mindset that he delivers it in a way that anybody can understand it. He's personable, and you learn something from him every time. And with that man at the helm, and Zach Brown doing all the commercial bits and bobs, that, to me, that's a great duo to have leading a team forward into uncharted territory for not McLaren historically, but as you said, for those who are in that team in the modern era.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Stella's one of the very best, and I think the big turnaround that we're seeing with McLaren, the start of 2023 season, they were right at the back, being very honest about how they'd missed development targets. 18 months later, they're disappointed that they're not winning races. You know, it's been a huge turnaround, and Stella is a massive part of that and absolutely deserves all of the plaudits that he's getting. But just to Benny's point, I think you can be a bit hard on McLaren because they have got the potential. They have got a race-winning car now. We've seen it. And I don't think anyone has been more hard on McLaren than themselves and Lando Norris. And to go back to the point I was making earlier, I think Norris needs to kind of rein it in a little bit on that front and maybe not be so publicly hard on himself. And obviously he is taking it all on himself. He's not blaming the team at all, as is always the way with drivers. They very rarely ever publicly say anything against their own team. But I just think he needs to be a bit kinder to himself and stop being so critical, because he is talking about himself, but that does filter back into the team.
And over the last 7 Grand Prix, McLaren have actually been the top scorers. 21 more points bagged over Red Bull. And that highlights our discussion earlier on in the session about that second seat at Red Bull, currently occupied by Sergio Perez. Okay, Verstappen might not be threatened for a driver's title, but certainly Red Bull will come under threat if it continues in that trajectory for the Constructors' Championship. Okay, Ferrari are the closest at the moment, but McLaren and the trajectory they are on will absolutely be contenders. McLaren, by the way, are 6th and 7th at the moment in this free practice 1 session. Norris ahead of Piastri. 14 minutes and 27, 26, 25 seconds remain of free practice 1. Where does the time fly here at the Hungarian? Carlos Sainz is fastest for Ferrari now, 2/10 clear on the soft tyre, 1:18.7. Verstappen is second, then it's Charles Leclerc in third. And that leads us nicely to Ferrari, who have had a bit of a rough few races, I think it's fair to say. Particularly Charles Leclerc, who's picked up 12 points in the last sort of 8 races, something like that. And 4 races, actually, no, I'm being too harsh. But could Hungary be a turning point, Beck?
Well, I think they would hope so. They've brought... so the issue has arisen from Spain, where they brought an upgrade which has turned out to be a downgrade, and they think they have a solution to it this weekend, a little tweak to the floor. Leclerc's currently third, just 3/10 off Sainz, who is he's first at the moment. So they have had a tricky few races. They've not been scoring points. It has been a bad run. We haven't talking about being harsh on people, we're saying about being harsh on McLaren. I think Ferrari actually have not had that much criticism about the last 5 or so races. I think everyone can see what went wrong. I mean, no one more so than themselves. There was this downgrade. They've been very open about it. Obviously, they've been trying to fix it. And it looks, at the moment, on current form, with Sainz first and Leclerc third, that it's going pretty well for them.
Yeah, it is. We think Sainz was on new softs, and Verstappen when he did his on olds. That's what we're hearing on that one. But Sainz is fastest at the moment, and very much still putting himself in that shop window for where he comes out. The main thing with Ferrari, they've got a few upgrades, or a little bit of an upgrade to their floor this weekend. But it's that we've sort of seen a resurgence of their bouncing problems. It's almost, going back to that dreadful porpoising word from a couple of years ago. I thought we'd drop that left out of the door as well, but that has been something that's haunted them over the last couple of races. And Charles Leclerc, well, I think also unlucky strategy mistakes for him and his Ferrari team, meaning he didn't score in Silverstone, and of course Austria picking up damage on lap 1 as well, kind of saw his race run before the end of the first lap. But hoping for a turnaround here, Ferrari then, with 7 wins around this track. Not the most of the teams. That accolade goes to McLaren, who have 11 wins around this circuit, the most successful of the teams currently in it. Towards the back of the field at the moment, we've got the 2 Haas drivers right at the back. Esteban Ocon has just crossed the line to go 18th fastest, but everybody who is out there at the moment has put on the soft tyre, with the exception of Lewis Hamilton, who is out there on the medium tyre, and his teammate George Russell. Here is Russell.
Ocon just in the middle of the road. Nice, up. Guys, defend him.
On the run down to turn 12, that was Russell. And then just seeing these images replay of clouting the curb through the chicane, the front wing moving and shaking, and there's actually been a bit of scrutiny on these front or flexi wings that they're calling it now. And the FIA are going to use some new checks for the Belgian Grand Prix on certain cars to have cameras connected to them to just check how flexy some of the wings are. And it's a debate that I thought had kind of died down over the last year or so, but clearly the FIA feeling they need to do a few more checks on it.
Yeah, I thought it had gone away as well, but no, it's back with a vengeance. And as you say, they're going to be mounting these cameras just to check the level of flex on that front wing. So I guess we'll wait to see what the outcome is on that.
Yeah. Sainz making his way round the right-hander of turn 5. This is the sound of the Ferrari. Just runs out wide, you'll hear it. And picks up a bit of grass for good measure, but manages to control it back onto the tarmac. 10 minutes and 3 to 1 minute to go. Sainz is indeed fastest, ahead of Verstappen though, who has just launched a quick lap as he makes his way through turn 1, and then it's another dosage of DRS down to the left-hander of turn 2, but the DRS effect quite low here. It's only a 610 metre main straight and then a much shorter, less than half of that distance between turn 1 and 2. He's already through 3, and then to the uphill blind left-hander of turn 4. He's just over a tenth up on Carlos Sainz's time in the first sector. Round the right-hander of turn 5, the water park in the background. Through 6 and 7, the quick chicane, the back end just slightly stepping out for Verstappen, but he keeps it calm and collected. Through then this middle sector, long arcing corners through turn 8, then the right-hander of 9 before another short straight down towards turn 12. 90-degree right-hander, keeps it within the white lines, very easy to run out wide there as well before you brake for the long arcing left-hander of turn 14. Pit lane entry to your right, actually lost a bit of time in that middle sector. Round the final corner of turn 14, and DRS rear wing flap flies open for Verstappen, who crosses the line and actually lost time in the second and third sectors, so doesn't improve on his time, stays second fastest, but that's a lap of the Hungarian, which is very taxing on things like brakes. Got the high temperatures, there aren't those long straights allowing you to have those cooling effects either. So in these first hours practice, teams getting up to speed with that, and of course their new upgrades. Now, Beck, what do you do about a team like Sauber, who are currently plumb last in the constructors standing, 0 points to their name? They've actually got listed quite a lot of upgrades for this weekend. Side pod, engine cover, floor, rear corner, rear suspension, performance enhancing elements to the halo, the mirrors and the headrest. Joe is currently 5th, and he's just set about on a fast lap on the soft. Bottas on an out lap now, he's down in 15th. And it was actually here last year where we had the alternative tyre allocation, I think it was called, where we changed up the tyres, and both Saubers in the top 10, or was it 2 years ago? Might have been 2 years ago, actually. Joe with his best ever qualifying. Obviously, he didn't get off the line. He had an issue, and that put pay to that. But he clearly can hook it up when he needs to. But it just seems that both drivers are probably going to leave that team at the end of the year. They've got Audi, who are hiring people in the background, developing for their full works entry in 2026. But can you see a dramatic improvement for a team like Sauber to be ready enough to have a big German brand behind them, backing them as an entry?
I mean, there's no reason why not. So you look at McLaren 18 months ago, they've managed to do it and get in time. Audi coming in.
But it feels like Sauber have been piddling around this area for the last few years.
That was going to be the argument. I mean, McLaren have the infrastructure in place. That's the difference, I suppose. Sauber, I think you could probably argue, definitely not where McLaren are. They brought 9 upgrades this weekend, the most of any team, actually. I think that kind of shows you desperation almost of where they are, as you say, pointless at the bottom of the constructors' table. Both drivers looking to leave. It doesn't feel like it's a great place to be working at the moment, does it? No, and I can't see them getting up to where they need to be, to where Audi, a brand like Audi would expect them to be when they officially enter in 2026. As you say, in the background there is a lot of work going on. Audi obviously not constrained by the budget cap at the moment as it stands, because they're not technically in F1, so they're just throwing money at the project. We're obviously not seeing the results of that on track because they can't.
But we have seen big brands throw tons of money at at an entry a la Toyota, and the results haven't been there.
Yeah, it does happen. Money goes to waste. I mean, unless you're throwing it in the right direction with the right people, it is just, wasting money, burning money. So I don't have great hopes for Sauber, which is probably, I'm sorry to say to Sauber fans. But you've got to believe that Audi have seen something to
warrant
the money, everything that's coming in. Obviously, F1 is an incredible global shop window. That's why a lot of these brands are now coming in. We have the 2026 sustainable fuels. That's obviously another very attractive element for the car manufacturers. And so Audi can't just be spending all this money as a very expensive advertising campaign. There has to be something else there. Obviously, they've got Andreas Seidel, who was formerly of McLaren, a very good team principal as well. He knows Audi very well, having worked with them before in other motor series. It feels like the bedrock is there for the team, but they are not making any inroads, and it doesn't really feel like they're making much development progress. So yeah, you say, Joe is 5th at the moment, which is great. It shows the upgrades possibly are working. But Bottas, race winner Bottas with Mercedes has absolutely loads of experience. He's down in 15th at the moment. He's having a terrible season, really, let's be honest.
He's plumb. He's 21st in the Drivers' Championship.
And obviously he's now being connected to the Williams seat, potentially for next year, going back to Williams maybe, which is good for him. The thing with Bottas, for me, it feels a little bit like he's distracted by all the off-track antics that he's currently doing.
You think?
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't feel like he's fully invested in, and maybe perhaps this is unfair, he's fully invested in the Sauber Kick project, the mullet. Obviously he has the Australian girlfriend and he's very much embraced that, but then
the well-known taxi company advert at the start of the year.
Was bizarre. The calendar of his bum sticking out, and it's just, I don't know.
Do you think, though, that's amplified because he was so corporate when he was at Mercedes? Even everything, his hairstyle, much, short back and sides. He was the quiet Finn who was pretty good, and on his day could outpace Lewis Hamilton. Not very often, but could do it. And then finally getting that release into a Sauber, Alfa Romeo, whatever was branded on the front of the team. That seemed to be his opportunity to then be able just to showcase that personality a bit more and maybe enjoy himself and his surroundings and be a team leader. So I feel like it's because it's such a drastic change that maybe it feels like he's distracted.
Yeah, I can understand the point, but
because other drivers have off-track interests.
Yeah, they
do.
They do. But Mercedes weren't particularly strict with their drivers. You see what they allowed Lewis Hamilton to go off and do whatever he wanted, basically, and he was travelling the world in between races and doing all his fashion and his music. Perhaps Bottas was slightly more corporate back then, Kick, Sauber as they are now. Obviously not the same mammoth machine behind them as Mercedes. So yes, maybe it is slightly amplified. I mean, he's obviously loving life and really enjoying it, and who can blame him? He drives F1 cars for a living. So
I do think he could be the one in real risk, though, of not finding a seat next year.
I think Williams is a good shout.
But would they not rather, if Kimi Antonelli is available, would they not, if he doesn't go to the Mercedes seat, surely Antonelli winds up at Williams? Sorry to rehash our discussion from earlier. But if Antonelli does go to Mercedes, is Bottas the next choice?
Yes, I think Antonelli could actually end up spending another year in F2.
Really? Okay. Because there was a lot of talk about him. He skipped, for those who don't know, he skipped Formula 3. He went from the series below, skipped Formula 3, and both him and Behrman have had tough times in Formula 2 this season, racing for the Prema team, which historically has always been the best team, even though it's an equal championship, the best team to be a part of. But it's a new Formula 2 car this year, and Prema haven't quite got on top with the running of it. They both have now made breakthrough wins. Behrman on top of the podium in F2 in Austria, Antonelli on top of the podium in Silverstone, which was probably very well timed because we were hearing rumblings that the Mercedes board and higher-ups were a bit, well, hang on, why are we talking so much about Kimi Antonelli? I think he's dropped the Andrea a bit now, hasn't he? Why are we bigging him up so much when his F2 looks kind of subpar?
Well, he's currently 8th in the standings, isn't he? It doesn't look like he's having a very good season.
Yet no one's considering
Hadjar, who's leading.
Paul Aron, who's second, was actually dropped by the Mercedes junior team a couple of years ago, and is up there running for the championship title.
Colapinto is currently 5th. He had he was a FP1, I think, was he, last time out with Alpine. So, no, Antonelli is not, by any stretch of the imagination, having a good season in F2. Mercedes are doing everything they possibly can to protect him from the media, from the pressures that come with being potentially linked to an F1 seat. I don't think it's F1 I don't think it's Williams or Mercedes for him. I think F2, staying in F2 for another season is possible. And if that does happen, then that does open up that Williams seat to Bottas. And I think it would actually be a good choice, because Antonelli is a risk. He's absolutely a risk. He's an unknown risk in the sense that he's never driven an F1 car. Well, he's never raced in an F1 race before. But then you do have to bring in these young drivers, or else you're never going to find the next generation, the next best thing. And I do think there's still a bit of an issue with this ladder, as F1 like to call it, the F3, F2, F1. We've had a couple of years where people haven't been progressing. This season started with exactly the same driver lineup as we ended last year for the first time ever. It doesn't feel like there are many places for successful F2 drivers to go other than to other racing series, and not necessarily F1, which is obviously where they're aiming for.
Drivers are having much longer careers now.
Much longer, yeah. You think Fernando Alonso is still around, to the delight of some. So it is a good risk to take. Antonelli is very proven. Mercedes obviously have a lot more data on him than we do, and they are very keen on him. They definitely want him in F1 at some point. Whether or not he's ready, you're starting to get the sense. I mean, Benny mentioned it a bit earlier. They were very hot on Antonelli at the start of the year. Seems like that's simmering a little bit. It's a bit more lukewarm now. They're not talking about him as much. Maybe that's a PR strategy, I don't know, to kind of deflect away and take a bit of the pressure off. But I just have this feeling that Bottas would be better for Williams. At the stage that Williams are in at the moment, James Vowles, very smart man. He's doing a very good job there. He has got Albon, who is, for me, I think he's a brilliant driver and absolutely deserves to stay in F1. And I think if you had Albon and you had Bottas, that is a really strong pairing. It's a very fun pairing. It's great. Marketing would probably love it. But that's really good feedback. That's how you develop these cars. It's the micro feeling that these drivers have that don't appear on data, that they can go back to the engineers. Lewis Hamilton is famous for this. He can feel things that don't show up in the data, and then suddenly, before you know it, you've got a championship winning car because of how the feedback that he's giving. And other drivers have done this as well. But that is so important when you're at the stage of Williams of if they want to get back to the front, then they need the right drivers in, and Logan Sargent is not that driver.
Sadly, no. So Antonelli in another year of F2. So that puts Sainz in the Mercedes, Bottas in the Williams, Ocon in the Haas. Who's in that second Audi seat?
Oh, I don't know at the moment.
Liam Lawson.
Liam Lawson,
Liam Lawson, he's been touted. Well, still plenty to discuss for FP2, which you can hear on the BBC Sport website and app just before 4 o'clock this afternoon, or on your smart speaker of choice. All you have to do is ask it to play Hungarian Grand Prix Practice 2. That'll be on a little later on with myself. My thanks to Beck Clancy, who will also be back here, and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. At the end of FP1 then, it's Carlos Sainz for Ferrari, fastest, 2/10 clear of Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc third, Russell, Zhou Guanyu for Sauber, finishing in the top 5, Norris and Piastri 6th and 7th ahead of Tsunoda, Stroll and Hamilton round out the top 10. Sergio Perez is 11th, another big weekend for him to try and ease that pressure on the second seat despite his contract extension a couple of months ago. Ricciardo 12th, Alonso 13th. Both Aston Martin drivers not too happy with their cars. Upgrades on both of those cars. Stroll getting the upgrade this afternoon. Albon 14th. Bottas rounding out the top 15. Logan Sargent 16th. The two Alpines, not much to write home about in this first practice 1 session. Gasly ahead of Ocon. Kevin Magnussen in his first session now with his career, or his future, at least for the end of this season, decided he will no longer be a Haas driver. He ended 19th. And a man who knows he will be a Haas driver next year, Oliver Behrman, in place of Nico Hülkenberg for this session, just a 10th behind his teammate, 20th and last for the young Brit. He'll hand that car back over to Nico Hülkenberg for FP2. Well, we are back underway then for the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend. It is hot, it is sweltering, and that is set to continue. Carlos Sainz fastest ahead of Max Verstappen. We'll see you a little later on for free practice 2. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. See you later.